These are terrorists, and I don't know why they're here, but Donald Trump has issued an executive order that if anybody breaks U.S. law on a student visa and engages in pro-terrorist activity, they'll be deported. And that will, I don't know. I don't know why we take people that engage or support terrorism from that part of the world and bring them over here, and then they become a powerful lobbying force, as we saw in the election. I just don't get it.
In this recent interview on the Victor Davis Hanson show with Victor Davis Hanson, we learn about three major trending topics: how aggressive tariffs are being used in international negotiations, the sweeping sanctions imposed on nations like South Africa, and the dramatic release of Israeli hostages by Hamas. These discussions reveal how shifting policies and geopolitical pressures are reshaping global power dynamics. Before we dive into this discussion, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this channel. Now let's hear more from Victor Davis Hanson.
Well, Hamas was headed for extinction had Israel been allowed to go into the last corridor near Sinai. And they would have, but of course, they value human life. I mean, it's kind of strange how the Hamas rationalize it. When I was on campus and I had these impromptu talks, and I mentioned that to one of the protesters, and he kind of turned it around and said, well, Israel doesn't value Palestinian life. They think one Israeli is worth 1,000 hostages. And I said, no, it's you who think that, not the Israelis. But there was something that when we talked about that, I was worried about this deal. And I'm not an Israeli, so I understand that. I'm happy to get the hostage home. But they were not allowed to destroy Hamas. Hamas is a cowardly organization. When they went in on October 7th, they butchered innocent, largely unarmed people, raped them, mutilated them, burned them, every imaginable medieval crime. And then they snuck back and they hid in tunnels underneath mosque schools and hospitals, meaning they were willing to endanger civilians to protect themselves. And then they were almost eliminated. And then after Israel stopped this, they put some of them who were surviving, put their uniforms, and now they're releasing the hostages. But they're doing so under the auspices. Have you seen these guys in their fatigues and their green mask and all of this? And they act like they're so tough. And these are the people who fought the Israelis and were completely decimated. But now, because they cannot fight the Israelis, they act like they're triumphant almost, and they're controlling. So get rid of the idea that Hamas won't come back. They're already in prominent positions. And forget the idea of Western liberals who say, well, the Gaza people don't really like them. Yes, they only had an election one time and they hijacked the government. But two things: when you saw the hostages released, did you see the anger that the actual Hamas terrorists were trying to keep away the Gazan mob who might kill the hostages, and therefore they wouldn't get their other terrorist friends back? Not that they wouldn't mind, but they wanted to protect the Israelis so that they would get their thugs back. But my point is, it reminded me so much of the scenes from Palestinian videos and podcasts and television the day after October 7th, or indeed on October 7th, when they brought back corpses and Israeli hostages in trucks back through the hole in the fence, and the whole crowds came up and kicked them and spit on them. And when they have every time they release them, the crowds come by. So my point is, I don't believe in collective punishment, but I do believe that the Gazan people support the idea of October 7th. And the only reason they might object to it is they thought that Israel would not respond in the way that it did. And that's the only degree of remorse that they have, that tactically it wasn't smart. Probably that they didn't kill enough people. And what's really disturbing is we have all of these people who come over from the Middle East and they protest on these campuses for much of 2024, and they don't differentiate, as liberals say they do, between Hamas and Palestinians. To them, they're one and the same. And they were wearing even Hezbollah and Hamas insignia. And
As we just heard Victor Davis Hanson discuss the dramatic headlines around Israeli hostages released by Hamas and his explanation of how tariffs are being used as a negotiating tool, now let's hear him further elaborate on another key area, the controversial sanctions imposed against South Africa, discussed later in the show from Danis. These issues not only drive international policy, but also shape the domestic debate over government intervention and trade practices. Now, let's listen to what Victor Davis Hanson has to say.
or the Palestinian, they'll never happen, anything. And I do think, from what I understand from Israeli friends and what I've read, is the Israelis now, from interrogations and thousands of hours of video on home security cameras, they have a corpus of almost everybody who went in there, you know what I mean, that was not masked. And even the people that were masked, they have testimonies from other people who participated. So I think they have got also a corpus of how many of the killers of the 1,200 they have killed themselves, and it's a sizable number. But they're going to hunt down every one of those people, and they know it. And I think we'll see what happens. I just don't see Hamas giving up every hostage. That's what I'm saying. Because if they give up every hostage, the Israelis will finish going down list by list to the people who were murderers and rapists and torturers. And they're cowardly people, so they're not going to want that. All of this stuff is braggadocio. That's part of the weird thing about the Middle East. It's all of this Hamas, Hezbollah. You see all these videos, death to America, death to Israel, these big guys, 6 feet tall with beards and blindfolded, or they have masks on. I don't know what it is. When AK-47, da-da-da-da, and you're supposed to feel that these are the crack. And then you get these left-wing journalists that go over there from Europe, especially, but some from the United States, and they're so impressed. These are the crack troops of Hezbollah. They're not like Hamas. They're the deadliest troops in the Middle East. Yeah. He's interested. That gets people very angry that he's interested in culture. And he notices that Melania was not put on Vogue's cover, and they've gone after her official portrait. Did you see that? Where
Yes,
she wore a tuxedo, they said, and the subtext of that is, this is the most beautiful, stunning, tasteful first lady we've had since Jackie Kennedy. And if she were left-wing, she would be over every magazine, and we'd be gushing about her taste and her beauty.
Oh, my!
But because
Yeah.
she's married in the ninth ring of Dante's Inferno to Lord Satan, Miss Lucifer has to be
Right.
deplatformed, shadow banned, erased, ridiculed.
Yeah.
I was looking, the people who write these stories, Megyn Kelly mentioned it too, they're always 20-something, you know what I mean? They're right out of the Ivy League, and they're not very successful. They're not experts. I'm not saying they're experts on fashion or beauty or anything. They're just angry people who feel that they're a soldier in the phalanx of the left, and each must do their duty, and their duty is to attack anybody that disagrees with them in personal terms. Well, I mean, you're violating the cardinal rule of leftism that because of historic injustice, the victims are perpetually victims for the rest of their life, and the victimizers, even though they may be 3 to 4 generations away from apartheid in some cases, if young kids, they are perennially guilty. So there is no sympathy in the United States given for, say, an 18-year-old who grew up under black majority rule, and he's been shot or killed, or his dad's farm is taken. And the weird thing about this, it's not like we don't know what's going to happen, because we have a laboratory example. It's called Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. And when Mugabe came in, all the left-wing liberals said he was wonderful. He said exactly what the people in South Africa did, that they were not going to play tit for tat, that the white minority would be left alone, given the same rights as the black majority. Rhodesia was the biggest, I think, wheat producer in Africa. It was a sophisticated cotton producer. British white minority, it was about 10-12% of the population, but it was an enormously wealthy country. And he turned out to be a communist thug every year, and he was subsidized by the West, and then they finally turned out he was a killer. He was a brute. He was a dictator, and he confiscated all of those farms, and they all turned into wasteland, basically, and it became a net food import and impoverished. And same thing with South Africa. It had one of the most sophisticated grid systems in the world. It had some of the best infrastructure, port facilities. It had some of the most productive farms, Boer and English. It's some of the most beautiful places in the world, and it's gone. It's got one of the highest crime rates in the world, highest rape, highest murder rates, the major cities. So
they're commies too.
We know where it's going. It's going to go to, and everybody knows it's going to happen. And a lot of the black majority know they will be poorer in 10 years than they are now. And everybody in the United States knows it, and no one will stop it. So this cadre of thieves, because they will confiscate the white farms, destroy them, and then they'll sell the land out and pocket the money to other black people only. And that's why even the Punjabi class or Asians that have been instrumental in South Africa's economic miracle, they're leaving in droves because it's a racist country now. It's completely racist. The only difference is that the majority is the racist part, and then in the past it was the minority. The minority had apartheid. Well, now the majority has apartheid, basically. And the difference also is that the minority that practiced apartheid, although that was racist, there were two differences from the majority racism today. They were productive. They made this thing bloom for everybody, in a sense, if you believe in trickle down. But more importantly, they were self-critical. So there was a possibility to evolve because they were Western, and Western societies have built-in free speech and criticism. And so they voluntarily, I shouldn't say voluntarily, they had a civil war. They gave up power, and they had a constitutional process to depower them, or to make them part of the democracy, and they're a minority, so they don't have power. And the majority is not democratic. It doesn't believe in free speech. It does not believe in self-criticism. It will never change. It'll get more and more racist until there's no more land to confiscate and there's no more wealth to confiscate. And then South Africa will look like all the other countries in Africa. And until one over two, I mean, I'm not being racist or stereotyping, but there are a few, Ghana's trying to do well. It's not necessarily race, it's culture. And unless you adopt a free market society and a constitutional system of government and a separation between church and state, and get into tribalism and an independent judiciary, you're not going to have prosperity and security. Just a historical fact.
To watch the full interview, check out the link in the description. Victor Davis Hanson outlines how these controversial issues, Israeli hostages, tariff strategies, and South Africa sanctions, are not isolated events but part of a broader global power shift that could redefine international relations. We would love to hear your thoughts on some questions. Do you believe that using tariffs as a negotiation tactic can fundamentally change trade relationships? And how might these sanctions affect the future balance of global power? Thank you for tuning in to Only the Savvy. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, like, and share our video for more engaging content. SIM swap fraud is sweeping the globe, and your mobile security is at risk. Switch to Ifani and lock out SIM swap fraud and get the most elite mobile protection in the world. Ifani guarantees 100% protection from SIM swaps, backed by a $5 million insurance policy. Stay secure with reliable coverage, free international roaming, and unlimited data. Trust Ifani to keep your communications and assets secure. Get military-grade protection, 24/7 concierge service, and a hassle-free upgrade. Click the link below for $150 off. Thanks for watching. Help support this channel and receive exclusive offers from one of our partners located in the description. We'll see you on the next one.